This podcast is for general information purposes only and is not intended to create a physician-patient relationship. It is also not intended as a substitute for diagnosis, treatment, and/or advice by a qualified healthcare provider. Please promptly schedule an appointment with a qualified healthcare provider if you have a healthcare condition that has not been diagnosed or that is not under the regular care of a healthcare provider, or you're considering changes to your diet or exercise routines. Please refrain from self-diagnosis and/or self-treatment. And if you have a medical condition situation that may be urgent, then you should immediately report to the nearest emergency room.
And flat tires called jobs. But if you have a spear called determination and an engine called perseverance, with insurance called faith and the drive to make it, you'll reach a place called success.
All right, well, welcome to Reach a Place Called Success with Dr. J. Again, I am here, delighted to present Claire Este McDonald for part 3. Yay! This is a little bit of a deeper dive into Ayurveda. Claire, as you all probably know at this point now, is a yoga therapist. She is a registered nurse. She is a Baptiste master yoga teacher, and she's a breast cancer survivor. Welcome, first and foremost, Claire, back to the podcast.
Thank you, Jay. It's nice to be here.
So I do have to divulge, people will kind of find this funny because I do. We had a conversation yesterday, and it probably went about 2 hours. And the funny part about that was that most people would think, well, this is all prep time for doing the podcast. And I think about 30 seconds of that 2-hour conversation was, hey, what are you going to talk about tomorrow? What do we want to talk about tomorrow? Like, that sounds good. And I think that that's kind of the honest way that we are able to speak to people, is that this is just conversations between you and I that we find synergy, and other people seem to be connecting with, and that's kind of where we're at here. There's no script with this. There's no planning.
Yeah, no, it's very organic, and it's very much a conversation that wants to be had. It's creating something that I feel like life has been waiting for us to show up in the same space so that we can have this bigger conversation. And it's very enriching for me to be able to have this with you. So I'm just so glad that we're in this space. And then other people are interested in hearing what it is that we have to say, that we have to share.
Yeah, I mean, and the fun is not only just the conversation, but I think that you and I both are so excited about kind of this adventure of not knowing where this is going, which is kind of fun. It's exciting.
Yeah, the unknown.
Yeah. So let's start with really the starting point. When did you first get presented even the term or a part of Ayurveda in your life?
Well, it first started with my grandmother, as I had mentioned in the previous podcast, but I never heard the term. It was not like that was a word or a system she had been exposed to. My grandparents' life was just so close to nature, to the elements, and very natural and wholesome. And my mother was very much the same way, but in a way that nobody described it. Nobody talked about it. It was a way of living. It was a way of being. And my first real introduction to it through like languaging was with a doctor. I was a candy striper when I was 13 years old. And I was very inspired to become one because my grandfather, I had mentioned before, had lung cancer. And, he and my grandmother, not the same grandparents that introduced me to Ayurveda, but my dad's side. And they were really wonderful people, and they were very impactful. I loved them. I adored them. Every Sunday we would go over and spend time with them. And they were the Italian side of the family. And again, they live very close to nature, but in their own different way. And when my grandparents got ill, I was very drawn to taking care of them, to like wanting to be of service and of nurture and of essentially the space of kindness. I wanted to be available to them because they had been so available to me all my life. And it was through that I was inspired to become a candy striper. And when I did, there was a doctor, a pulmonologist, and his name was Dr. Prakash, and he was an Indian doctor. And this was, I don't know, 36, 37 years ago. And he took me on rounds. So I went on my first rounding with a physician when I was 13, and he took me around to all of his patients. And one of the things that he did with them is he was doing this breathing practice. He was teaching them how to do what's called Nadi Shodhana, or alternate nostril breathing. And I remember looking at it like, this is weird, like, you know, you're doing something with your nose. But I was very curious, and he looked at me and he said, Claire, if you do this, you will always be beautiful. I want you to remember this is, he called it pretty breath. He never went into calling it something, you know, weird or yogic or Vedic or whatever. He just said, this breath is always going to make you feel young and healthy and beautiful. And these little old women would giggle, they would laugh, and it would cheer them up. It would the amount of attention he brought to it was that, you know, this was going to be something that made you feel beautiful. So they were inspired to do it, and I was inspired to listen because that appealed to me. But it was this breath through the nostrils that he eventually told me, he's like, you know, this is just moving breath in a different way through your body. That's going to make you feel clearer. It's going to make you feel better. It's going to give you more energy. And I started doing that practice, and it did. And in fact, it did make me feel like I was prettier because I felt like I had less tension going on inside of myself. I felt like I was able to become more calmer and more relaxed and more present. And those are terms that I didn't use at the time. I look back and remember that when I was that age, I felt very anxious. When I was a teenager, I felt like, you know, how am I going to fit in? How am I going to make my way with other kids, with school and sports, and like already feeling that pressure of like, somehow I have to be somebody. When I grow up, I have to be somebody. And I remember that feeling was very overwhelming for me. So early on, I needed to have things that made me feel more grounded, because I was already, you know, going up into my head and already wondering and concerned about my well-being in the world. Like, how am I going to make my way? And so, you know, that was one of the beginning, it's like a very profound beginning for me. And I was a swimmer. So growing up swimming, I could connect to my breath. I would get in the water and feel like breathing was it was a way that I felt that I could come back to myself, like being in the water, the element of water, and finding a way where there was a rhythm and a tempo and a pacing, so that there was a physicalness of what I was doing that gave me a tool to come back to myself in a way that I felt more confident in life. I felt like, okay, for now I can deal. And so, you know, those experiences, at the time, I would never have said this is Ayurveda, but I remember them because whenever I would get off or feel like I was overwhelmed and I would come back to doing these things, I would start to feel better. And then later, when my true studying began, like my official studying of Ayurveda began in my early 20s, like where I started picking up books and started studying. I was very inspired by a guy named David Frawley and Vasant Lad, and they're like sort of the doctors in the United States of Ayurveda. And at first it was like overwhelming because it was like books written in a foreign language, quite literally. As Rilke says, books written in a foreign language. And I didn't even know what I was looking at, but I was so inspired to know more. Something inside me was already awoken to understanding, like, I don't know what this is, but if I stick around it long enough, I might learn something. Because already the little things that I was doing were making me feel better. They made me feel like I was more centered. I was more empowered to trust who I was and my own experiences in life, which, you know, I don't know, maybe people get to a point in their lives where they stop questioning or doubting themselves. Like even now, after all these years, I wake up in the morning and I'm like, am I doing the right thing? Am I on the right path? Like, am I paying attention? You know, who am I and who am I going to be? And so these questions have always been there for me. And I think it's through these it's the daily things, these daily physical practices, these daily little things that I do over and over and over again that I know have an impact in keeping me closer to my own center, closer to being able to know that, like, okay, for now, I feel like there's a mountain in front of me, and all I need to do is take one step. All I need to do is take one step, because if I take on that mountain, I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to be too overwhelmed. And so, you know, Ayurveda is essentially, it's a big thing. It's the mountain. But, you know, if you were to break it down simply, it really is, it's the science of life. And, you know, I share with my clients and my students that if we were born, and if there was ever a book or a manual that we should have come out of the womb with, it would be the book of Ayurveda, because it's the book. Ayurveda helps us to understand the elements, and we're made of the elements. Everything in life is made of the 5 elements, but we have our own unique combination of those elements that make us an individual, that make us special, that make our bodies different than anybody else's, that make our mind feel and experience the world in the way that we do, and the emotions and responses that we have to life. And what Ayurveda does is it takes into consideration that uniqueness. And there are, you know, it's like there's a roadmap to helping us to understand, like, well, how, when you feel like this, try this. Okay, when you feel overwhelmed, try closing your eyes, try sitting down, try doing something that's grounding. And when you're feeling really heavy and dull and stagnant, try to do something that's uplifting, try to do something that's stimulating, that's going to get you circulating, that's going to get you moving in the opposite direction. So in essence, it's really a balance of the opposites and finding where in those opposites, where you are in the continuum. Where's your energy in the continuum?
And that's, I think, kind of going back to one of the beginning introductory things that you were talking about, which is the breathing, right? You were kind of living out there saying, hey, listen, there's all these things that are happening in the world. How am I interacting as a teenager? Where you found that using that breathing technique that you had learned from the pulmonologist as a candy striper brought you more internal. And I think that that is a really important part for especially the teenagers these days. I mean, they are just, everything is social media. Everything is presenting themselves in a particular fashion and how the world is seeing them instead of how are they experiencing things on their own internally. And one of the things that I think that in our discussions rings true is the fact that Ayurveda is kind of a part of all of us already. It just doesn't have a name. It doesn't, you haven't defined it yet, but it's part and parcel with way you find success, or you are looking for ways to calm yourself down, ways to get yourself motivated. There are techniques that you may not have really even put a label on yet in your own life, but they're an aspect of Ayurveda, and understanding that more, diving into and understanding what you need at any one particular time, and it changes, like you and I have talked about, on a day-to-day basis even, is kind of that further understanding that I think that is kind of the crux of all of this. Is that kind of a good way to summarize it?
Absolutely. No, you're very articulate and clear about something that can seem very, very huge, because, you know, the study of life is something that is very organic. It's unfolding every minute of the day. And we're closer to this than we realize. And just like you said, we don't use the word, we don't know the word Ayurveda. I didn't know the word Ayurveda. You know, it's not we label something. We call something by name so that we have a way of organizing a system. But Ayurveda, and this is the beautiful thing about it, is it's nature. It's understanding our relationship to life and to how life is moving through us. And it comes down to how well do we digest, essentially. How well do we digest in our physical body? And how well are we digesting what we feel mentally and what we experience emotionally? Because at the end of the day, what happens is that when we're not digesting well, things build up, right? Things build up in our system. We get constipated. We physically get constipated, but look at how much emotional and mental constipation we have in our lives, where we just get blocked. We get stuck. We can't process. We don't understand what's going on. And I know from myself that the things, like even this conversation that you and I are having, it's taken me 4 years to even begin to be able to get at a little bit of what I went through with my breast cancer. And, you know, so it's like there's a timing to things. Not everything happens just because we want it to. And this is also the study of the elements, because things happen, you know, it takes longer for us to process something physically in the body, because the body's so dense. The body has mass. We can touch it. We can feel it. And that's why we have to move our bodies. We have to stimulate our bodies. We have to exercise. We have to breathe. We have to put good nutrition in, because this is what this body gives us, a reference point to how well we're doing, right? We can feel in our flesh and bone eventually if things aren't going very well. We can have a thought about something and not quite get any clarity as to like what that feels like until things get along far enough that we begin to have symptoms in our body. And what I mean by that is, like, you know, I knew that there was discord in my system. I knew mentally that my life had a lot of stress, that my life had a lot of daily habitual patterns that were trying to counterbalance the emotional and mental stress that I felt. And when I look back at my life, I realized, you know, I was a trauma nurse and working in an emergency room, in a pediatric emergency room. And I would skip meals. I would be in the middle of taking care of a patient. I would be, you know, 6, 8 hours, 10 hours in and never eat anything, never drink anything, feeling this adrenaline coursing through my system. And then at the end of the night, or the middle of the night when I would go home and be like, okay, now I need to take care of myself in the middle of the night in a way that would be like out of sorts with nature, out of sorts with, I'd be staying up all night long when I should be sleeping. And at some point, the system just says, okay, you're getting so far away from what's healthy and balanced for you that accumulates in your system. And in Ayurveda, you know, we look at that and go, okay, so we know that was the causative factor. We know that those lifestyle practices started to accumulate in your body. And that impacted my digestion. That impacted how I digested and processed food. Mm-hmm. It impacted how I digest and process my emotions, because I never have any time to process my emotions. There was never any room in my life to take those things into consideration. So there's a point though where you go on like that for so long. I think a lot of us can relate to that, right?
Yeah. I think that's one of the most common ways that we were presented this in medical school, is like just the idea and principle of the sleep bank, right? And I think that the idea is that we have a bank for everything, right? If you go and you're constantly making withdrawals from the sleep bank, right? And you are sleep deprived, and every night you are not getting your sleep, at some point you need to make a deposit, and you need to go back, and you need to, your body will tell you, you have to sleep, right? Well, I think that like I said, there's going to be that bank, different types. Oh, we have a visitor. Who's this?
This is Popcorn.
Popcorn. All right, so everybody needs to understand this. This is you're probably listening to the podcast, and I have to stop because there's a very cute kitten there. Popcorn is a black and white kitten. How old?
He's probably 5 now.
Very cool. So, yeah, sleep bank. I mean, this is the crux of it, right? Your body will tell you eventually that you are depriving it of sleep or whatever that thing is that you need. The thing that I want to go back to, if you don't mind, is because there's this connection that you keep making regarding nature and the elements. And even in the beginning, you talked about how your grandparents were really, one with nature or really into nature. What did that mean? What does that mean to you? And that way we can kind of have an understanding, because, I start immediately thinking about myself and my grandparents and being one with nature in a different way, going for walks because they lived in the middle of Pennsylvania, even just, being around, my grandparents in that fashion was, something that is very, I connect to that. And I think that all the time I've referenced when I go for runs in the woods, it takes me back. So tell me a little bit more about, what nature means to you, how it fits with Ayurveda, and, what you experienced early on as a child.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, I'm so close to it. And this is a good question because, my husband was asking me this morning too. He says, you become a different person. For me, like you put me in the water and I become a different person. Like I know when I have felt like I have just been so strung out. I've been feeling that way lately because I've been on the computer so much. Now my whole life is like in this little phone, in this little computer. And I can tell that it makes my nervous system really, really thready. It makes me really kind of tight and wound up. And then something like I get up and this morning I got up and I went out my backyard and I just stood in my backyard and I took off my shoes and I had my feet get dirty in the dirt to feel the ground. Like I needed to feel the actual dirt and to smell the air, to smell the trees that are blooming in my yard, and like just to be around the trees and the grass and the air and the sunlight and to feel like as the sun was coming up, I thought like, this is that connection back to nature. It's like I was getting my body back onto the rhythm of like, okay, I'm depleted and I can eat some food and that's going to be one level of nutrition. But another level of nutrition is just like going outside, like shifting what it is that I'm looking at, shifting what it is that my mind is obsessing about or focused on, and then being immersed outside in the elements where, the trees, they do something. We know that being around greenery and trees, that there's a different vibration that they hold that is different than a computer screen. And so that counterbalances like how I feel. And growing up with my grandparents, they were gardeners. They were outside all day long and they worked with their hands in the soil. They cultivated, food from the ground all the way to the dinner table to canning. And so their whole life, everything was close to them. It wasn't processed. It wasn't messed with. It was something that was from start to finish. It was handheld and nurtured and cared for. And that to me is what nature is. It's like there's a hand in my food. There's a presence when I'm cooking food or I'm engaging with anything, that I feel that I'm connected to something bigger. Because if I get lost in my own head, and I know very quickly when I'm sort of stuck in my head, nothing feels satisfying. Everything feels like I'm just doing it to get it done. And I'll notice a huge shift in me immediately if I just go outside for a couple of minutes. If I prepare dinner and I can be present to what it is that I'm doing. All of those things are, Ayurvedic, okay, we can use that term, or they're just ways of just being present and being in touch with what I'm actually doing in that moment, and noticing the energy of where I am and the energy that I'm continuing to foster by what it is that I'm doing, if that makes any sense.
100%. It's funny because what goes it through my mind is the term home cooking. When you say the term home cooking, you get this kind of nostalgic thought. Yeah, my mom might not have been the best cook, but she was a great baker. But the idea of home cooking, just that term, means that someone took and prepared something with love and gave it to you, and it was nurturing in some fashion. And that's, I think, there's so many bad things, as we all know, with fast food, but that's a huge part that's missing, right? It's just prepared, that was probably made in a science lab somewhere. But the idea is that there was nothing from, cultivating food from a ground, taking it and then preparing it and then giving it to someone. And that process is so involved and there is so much more to it and so much more meaningful. And appreciating that, I think that it goes a long way.
Yeah, it's about the consciousness for me, and it goes back to like, we do the best we can, right? We have a certain amount of resources and we do the best that we can. And then there's just not having access to the good information. And for me, that's an important part of like the career paths I don't even call what I do a career path. It's a calling. I know like being a nurse is way too hard to say it's a career path. It's definitely a calling. Like nurses and doctors, it's like something just pulls you to being of service in that way, because there's just so much that these career paths hold that it's just too hard to say that it's like, I wanted to become a doctor because I was going to earn tons of money, or I was going to be a nurse because I was going to be a great career. And it's like, no, there's just so much of you that has to be present and involved in order to stay in that field. But again, that's the point, is that it's the consciousness. It's like, who are we being? What are we bringing to our life? And there's a saying, and there's no way for me to get around sharing this, what we call a shloka, or this sutra in Ayurveda. There's a saying about having balanced doshas, or balance of vata, pitta, kapha, which are the balance of the 5 elements, which is a balance for your constitution. Like, balance from my constitution is not balance for your constitution. But we look at that, we say, okay, what is health? Health is a balance of these 5 elements in the way that they make up you. There's a balance in your digestion, and that you are able to take in food, you are able to take in life and able to digest it, break it down, assimilate that, and build the tissues of your body. And that's the other piece, is to have balanced tissues, to have balanced structure and physical foundation, so that prana can flow through you, and so that you can live the longest, happiest, healthiest life. And we also take into consideration, which is a huge important part of health, is that, okay, that we're able to, excrete. Your body's able to, you move your bowels, you sweat, you clean your channels. And that's what happens when you have proper digestion, proper consumption of food, as well as now having satisfaction in your mind, in your body, in your soul, and in your sensory organs, that there's a contentment in the way that we're engaging with life. And I think for me, that was the bell went off when I read that sutra like 30 years ago. I remember reading that going, I want that. If that's what health is, because I can move my body and I can do all this exercise and think that I'm doing really great things for myself. And I've done all that. And I realized at one point that the way that I was moving my body, the excess of it, because I had talent in running, I could run long distances. But just because I could didn't mean that I should every day to that velocity, because there was a lack of truly listening to what was necessary. And when I read this shloka, and I read it every day, I remind myself of it every day, is like, it's a balance. It's a daily balance. It's a daily listening to the environment around me, the elements around me, because spring impacts me very differently than the fall does. Like the spring, the springtime, I love it. But at the same time, like my body in the springtime has very different needs than how I take care of myself in the summertime. I have a lot of fire in my constitution, and I love the idea of summer in my head. But come July and August, I'm like, I stay inside a lot more. I don't go out in the middle of the day. I can't stand the sun beating down on my head. I wear sunglasses, I wear hats. I love the idea of it, but I'm also like a lot like summertime in many ways, in my personality, my energy, that it becomes too much. And I need to counterbalance that. I need to find a way to be like, okay, if I'm going to exist in this environment, I have to do things that keep me healthy so that I don't feel overwhelmed by this environment, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, for sure. Interesting. So when were you first presented that idea? Was that when you started training?
It was when I started training in my early 20s officially. And at the time, what really inspired me was I was having a lot of digestive disorders, and that's when my back stuff started showing up. It was like right around there. My first back injury happened when I was just out of nursing school. I think I'd mentioned this in the last podcast. And so like I was 23, and I was already having a lot of, like the middle of my body wasn't acting quite right. You know, digestion, I would always feel like I was bloated. My belly would blow. Every time I ate something, my belly would bloat, my back would hurt. And I wasn't getting any answers other than like I was starting to have some breakdown of my body in this way. And I couldn't get any answers. Everyone was like, oh, you know, you have back pain and there's no injury, nothing showing up on an MRI, and you've got belly pain, but ultrasound is fine. Nothing's wrong with anything. Everything's fine. But in Ayurveda, we can read earlier symptoms. We begin to notice, well, if you're having digestive disorders, we know earlier on that there's an imbalance in the elements. There's an imbalance in digestion. And I started to address it, and not to the extent that I know now, but back then it was like, okay, you know, taking in things like ginger tea and not eating raw food and sitting down to eat a meal, something that my grandparents, going back to what they taught me, if you ever ran around eating a meal, they would like physically go and get you, put you in a chair, and make sure that you were seated at the table and that the was calm and that you could make room for the food, like that you could take in the nourishment of the food in the process of eating. And then when I became a nurse, it was like I knew that, but I went way over to the other realm and so out of balance that, you know, I would be running around eating, multitasking, never making any time for the food, never making any time for the nourishment. It was just a job to get done so that I could continue doing what I was already doing.
Now, is that the Italian side of your family?
That made me sit down and eat?
Yeah.
That was both.
That was both.
That was
yeah,
both.
Because I mean, if you know, you ever travel to Italy in particular, I mean, it's all about the meal. I mean, they first and foremost don't eat until later. They usually go out with the family, or it's a family meal at home, and it's a process. You have to. It's part of, you know, and things have actually changed quite a bit. Like socializing now is the process of sitting down and eating, which is a wonderful thing. I like that a lot. But even then afterwards, the passeggiata, it's like walking after the meal with who you ate with. It's all a process of appreciation and slowing down, which is a wonderful thing. We do way too much the opposite of that in our lives right now.
Exactly. And what you just said, though, about one of the things, and so, you know, some of the principles that we really cultivate in Ayurveda is like, okay, you eat a big meal, and one of the best things you can do is go for a nice, long, slow walk. It's a digestive.
Yeah.
It improves circulation. It helps to improve that your food is going to get moving in the right direction, that the energy in your body is going to move in a way that nutrition gets into your body, into the tissues. And we underestimate the power of food. See, food is medicine. Like we can take we give prescriptions, right? We have pharmaceuticals, and they do something very specific. We know that they target organs, and impact the way that, like, say we have high blood pressure, when we take a blood pressure medication and it brings the blood pressure down. Well, like, what caused the blood pressure to go up? Like, what's a thing that we do repeatedly over and over and over again? And when we begin to look at like those habits, we realize, well, we eat food all day long. We think thoughts all day long. We experience emotions all day long. And for health, we actually have to look at like, okay, where in those areas may we be accumulating something that is causing us to have an elevation in our blood pressure? Now, granted, we all come with a full package. We come with hereditary. We come with all sorts of things that, you know, we pick up along the way. But if we look at what's happening daily and we pay attention to that and the impact that that has upon our health and well-being, I feel like therein lies a secret that we may be missing in having a lot more say in how our health goes, a lot more power in being able to partner our health by the habits that we choose and the things that we do to keep ourselves more in balance. And at least that's what I found for myself, is that I notice, and as I had shared with you yesterday, is like I just had a weekend where I was teaching from 7 a.m. until 7 p.m. And when I'm in front of a group of people, I can get earthed physically. I can use my body and, you know, stand a certain way and move a certain way so that I can hold the group that I'm working with. But I've been on a computer screen, and so I don't have the same ability to connect to earth when I'm moving through a computer screen, because it's so intense on my eyes and my sensory organs. It can almost be like I don't have a body when I'm teaching in this way. And so the last couple of days, I've had to counterbalance all of that energy that I put out. I have to do things like get really, really quiet, and I have to do my yoga practice. I have to go for walks. I have to take baths with Epsom salt and put some oil on my feet, put some oil on my skin, because these are all ways of just going, calm down, calm your nervous system.
Yep. You're paying that bank back that we're talking about.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So you keep talking about digestion, right? And it's kind of a two-part thing, right? It's not only what you are taking in for the literal term that we know, or for medical term, digesting food, but it's also kind of like you're using it as a term that's regarding kind of the fire in your belly, so to speak.
Yeah.
And they're not mutually exclusive either, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about the food. You know, you've mentioned now, you know, kind of the process that you go through. You do lime water in the morning.
Hot water, lime, and honey first thing.
And that, you know, I've had discussions with other nutritionists. You know, there's these patterns that seemingly that are kind of consistent across the board, and it's interesting because one of my close friends, Scott Stoll, who I had on the podcast, talk about the microbiome that we have in our guts, and you know, treating that you know, is embracing what we have. Really goes a long way about how we absorb all of our nutrients, our inflammation in our body. There's so many things to that. And I think that there's consistency across the board that you know, I'm trying to see. The thing that actually was most intriguing that he had talked about is that it's not only what you have and what you eat and how you treat yourself, but it's also the people that you live with and are essentially with on a day-to-day basis. Your microbiome actually starts to mimic and be like those individuals that you're with.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if it's 100% related to the bacteria that's in the gut, or if it's related to also just how other people are mentally also dealing with things. Their fire in their belly, is that contagious? You know, there's certain things that we know and certain things we don't know. And I'm just curious, you know, what is that process? Is it, again, just an elementary thing that we can see in medicine? It's pathophysiology of those microbiome, or is there something else? Is it a fire of a belly of another source that you have been talking about?
It's such a good question, because the microbiome in Ayurveda, we're all talking about the same thing. We just have terms for all of it. And in Ayurveda, we have a term called Agni, A-G-N-I, which is loosely translated, it's this digestive fire, right, in our gut. And the gut is a very important place in the body. And we know that in Western medicine, we know that in all of these other traditions. In Ayurveda, we focus, everything is around that. Everything is around this Agni, because Agni is what, it digests your food, but it's not just in your gut. And it's like physiology in Western medicine, is that we know that we have kinetic energy in the body, right? We know that we metabolize, anabolic, catabolic. We have these processes that are always going on in the body. Well, Agni, this Agni that we have in the gut, we also have that same Agni in every cell in the body. We have this fire in every cell in the body that is processing the cellular metabolism. Like we have cellular respiration, breathe, we get oxygen in our lungs, and that oxygen is absorbed, right, through the alveoli. And then we're having this flow of oxygen through our entire system so that we have cellular metabolism. It's the same thing. If you think about it this way, the Agni that happens in the gut is breaking down our nutrition. But in order for that nutrition to really get deeper and in the right places in our body, we need the cells to be able to absorb it. And there's like it seems like it's like a secret message, so Harry Potter, like it seems like it's some like outer worldly thing, but it's not. It's essentially what metabolism is that everything is a process inside. And however strong, if our Agni is not strong in our gut, it's like throwing a cog in the wheel. It's like nothing else can function well because we're not able to break down the initial food that comes into the body. We can't access the nutrients. We can't access the nourishment to build the tissues of the body. And therein lies where the whole system starts getting clogged up. And the microbiome, we're like trees. You know, as human beings, we don't necessarily realize how interconnected we are. But we know that, like, you know, a group of women that all start living in the same house, eventually they're all going to start having their period at the same time. Something happens where vibrationally, energetically, those are the only words I know how to use, because what else is it? Somehow we all, like a school of fish, they don't all need to say we're going right. Something in their, you know, their energy knows that the whole school of fish is going to move as one. We're the same way as human beings. We very much impact each other. And, you know, we know, have you ever been around somebody that makes you feel very mentally uncomfortable, or you're feeling emotionally concerned or afraid? You can tell, even without them saying something, we get triggers that go off inside of us. It's all the same thing, but we don't have like a way of just putting our finger on the pulse of it, because it's not something that you can measure in your hands. Feeling, it's an experience that sends a chill up your spine, and it's as real as something that you can hold in your hands, and probably even more so because that's that feeling that sets off what eventually happens in our physical body. When this feeling is giving us a warning sign and we don't listen, or we don't know how to listen to it, eventually what happens is the feeling gets stronger and stronger and more advanced, and then eventually it lands in the body and we're left to feel it in a very tangible way. And, the Agni, this word we go back to, it's not just digestive fire, but it's what gives us our charisma. It gives us our intelligence. It gives us our, that je ne sais quoi that makes somebody, you're around somebody and, like you just feel their energy and you want to be around it. You can, when someone has a really good, strong fire or microbiome, there's a magnetism. You're like, wow, I want to have what they're having. What do they do? Because I want some of that.
Yep.
And we have access to that. So it can seem like that's a special thing. It's a glorious thing, but it's something that is available to all of us. It's just that we don't necessarily know which tool to pull out and when. And that's why I do love yoga and Ayurveda, because I know that when I do these tools of like getting on my yoga mat, I know when I'm getting all foggy or busy, and I get on that 2x6 thing and I move back and forth and I breathe. Eventually what happens is I go, oh, okay, wait a minute. Things are starting to settle down. I'm breathing, I'm moving, I'm circulating, I'm getting that Agni flowing again. I'm getting the circulation going again, where it opens me back up to possibility. It empowers me, inspires me to be present so that the fears or the doubts and concerns that consume me, that can take over, this helps to just get me more grounded, counterbalances all that stuff so that I can be available to what's happening right now. And that's like one of the most important things for health is like just getting the mind, the soul, the body, getting everything in the same place at the same time. And what happens from that place?
I think that's, it's beautifully spoken. I think that's one of the biggest issues that we see, with modern medicine and accepting a lot of these things, because they're a little abstract, right? They're objective. They're not quantifiable, right? Physicians can't measure these things and be able to apply them and run them through the research, wheel. The interesting part of that, though, is the fact that probably the number one thing that patients go in to see physicians for is pain, which is 100% subjective. Physicians don't have a painometer, right? They have to listen to the patient to determine what they're feeling and ask questions about the qualities of their pain. They can give them a scale, which is really meaningless. But this is like, they call it the fifth vital sign, but the reality is there's so many other things that are out there that this is where the physician, whatever your illness is, can only do so much. You as a patient can't just be a passenger with your health, right? You are a participant, right? Everybody responds differently. And that's the whole point with all of this, is that we're trying to bridge that gap between what the physician can help you with and what you can help you with, right? So we're trying to give a voice to try and have you tap into helping yourself.
Exactly. And that's the part that can feel like, at first, like there's a lot of static, because it's not quite clear as to like, how do I listen? What am I listening for? And there's, it can be a very scary step to feel the gap between what you feel and what you think you should be doing. I know for myself, and I still revisit it, even though I have all this experience and having been through such deep processes. Every day I wake up and I'm like, no, you gotta like really just slow down and notice and be honest. That's the biggest piece. I find that no matter what, there's still a little thing in the back of my head at times where I think I should just kind of plow through, push forward, push past it. Because that's my tendency, is to just push a little, just suck it up, just push a little for. It's show, the saying, show up and suck until you show up and shine. And I thought, no, it's like you already got that one. And so for me, I always have to go, no, just be kinder, be slower, be stiller, because my energy is always moving, it's fiery, it's moving fierce. But that's not the same for some others who, their energy is heavy. If you have more of that kind of heaviness in your constitution, it's like looking at my bulldog, my big American bulldog. He does not move at all like my Labradoodle. If I expect those dogs to have the same energy, they're going to get unhealthy. And so what I do with my bulldog is I have to get up and I have to stimulate him. I have to get him moving. I have to get his energy a little peppier. And my Labradoodles, I have to essentially just sit on top of them and hug them and squeeze them to get them more grounded. And I mention dogs because dogs are fantastic and they're always wonderful, and they are who they are. But as human beings, it's almost like we're all trying to be the same breed, and we're not. And it can feel very, very broken if you're not the right breed of having a physical body, right? We spend a lot of time focusing on people being skinny or slim and fit. And there's one type that we say, this is healthy, right? We even have those anthropometric measurements that say, this is where we should all be. If you're 5'9", you should weigh this amount. And if you're this, you should weigh that. And it's like, well, depending on how much of these elements comprise who you are, that's not going to be the case for everybody. We're not all going to fit into a box. And so we can already have this skewed idea of who we should be. And we have that wiring inside of us. And that's what we're actually going into. We're going into that wiring as okay, let's just get honest with how you feel. And then let's look at the wiring or the misinformation we've all been given about what is healthy. And we have to take it apart and look at the individual and go, okay, this is healthy for you, for now, right here, right now, given these circumstances. Let's get to this state of health. Not this person's state of health over here, because that's not going to work for you. Let's get this system, let's get your mind, your sensory organs, your body, let's get them all on the same page together where you're not fighting yourself. But that comes from an internal, the ability for us to go inside of ourselves. And that's the part where, yoga, breath work, meditation, doing things daily, like getting up and moving your body, getting up and sitting down and being at a table and not running around eating our meals, eating food that's wholesome, that's been, as close to lovingly prepared as possible, where we have a sense of relationship and connection. Because I feel like it's easy to go through life. And I know at times for myself that you can be surrounded by people and still feel lonely. Right? And not have.
Yep. Yeah. So, when we talk about presenting in an hour, Ayurveda, it's impossible to go through all the tenets and to, go through, because it's something that takes a long, long time. And even you have been living your life this way and you're still learning, right? So I think that you've done a beautiful job today of kind of encompassing the thought of what we're trying to accomplish. And I love it. I mean, like I said, this is where I think we're getting down to the nitty-gritty of understanding that, again, the physician's role, modern Western medicine, evidence-based medicine, is one thing, right? But you got to have an awareness about what you can bring to the table. And that's where I think that, what you're discussing, I want to say preaching, because it's almost like on another level here, is so important. I think it's critical for everybody to have, whether or not it's something as part of a healthy lifestyle, or if it is something that is of very value to your road to recovery from an illness. So, you know, I think it goes without saying we could continue to have this discussion and this conversation continue for hours and hours and hours. But, you know, I think that we got a great taste for what you are discussing, what Ayurveda is, because there's no great definition for it. And it's until you know it or put words to an experience or how you feel that is part of Ayurveda, you don't know. So thank you again for another awesome hour that just seems to fly by.
Thank you, Jay. This has been wonderful. And you so eloquently wrapped that up about the whole until you have an experience of Ayurveda. When you have it, it's like you swallow it and you feel it, and then you know it, and it doesn't have to have a word. You have the experience, and it's so refreshing to have this conversation with you and to put this out there, to share this with others. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you. And I am excited because we are going to continue this conversation for another podcast for everybody, and then where we go to from there is yet to be determined. So, you know, our final of our 4-part series with Claire will be in 2 weeks, and we're going to discuss kind of what our next steps are. It's going to be a free-flowing kind of experience for us to say, what are the options? Well, how are we going to be able to reach as many people as we can and inevitably help as many people as we can? So we hope you guys are loving this. We've been hearing such positive feedback. Certainly reach out to Claire or myself about topics, things that you're thinking about that we can add to the mix, and where we can go to from there. Otherwise, again, thank you so much, Claire.
Thank you.
And thank you, everybody, for listening to Reach a Place Called Success. And we'll see you in a couple weeks. Bye.
Speed bumps called friends, and red lights called enemies. Caution signs called family, and flat tires called jobs. But if you have a spear called determination, and an engine called perseverance, with insurance called faith, and the drive to make it, you'll reach a place called success.